Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steven Siegel. I'm with Accenture, and I'm responsible for our AWS relationship across the Americas.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Ernesto Gutierrez de Piñeres. I am the Vice President of Science, Technology, and Innovation from Ecopetrol. Thank you to invite to share with you Amazon, AWS, and Accenture about the Ecopetrol. Ecopetrol is the largest company in Colombia and one of the most largest companies in the energy sector in Latin America. We have operation.
Let Guillermo introduce, and then we go.
Guillermo Quiñones. I'm a managing director from the Colombia office, newly promoted, so that's why. I'm very happy to be here. So I guess, Steve, you're going to tell us a little bit about AABG and then...
Yeah, let me just kind of quickly start out here. So our relationship with AWS dates back about 14 years. 7 years ago, Accenture and AWS came together and formed the Accenture AWS Business Group, or AABG. And in short, AABG's mission is really all about accelerating not just customer transformations, but really industry transformations. And we do that by building joint solutions and taking those to market. And within Accenture and AWS, we saw energy as a key priority for us. One around energy transition, and within energy transition, really the overarching theme of sustainability. And so Accenture and AWS partnered with Ecopetrol. We started our journey probably about a year ago, where the three organizations came together and said, we are going to build a solution for the industry on water neutrality. Okay? And Ecopetrol has been, an incredible partner, has really been kind of the lighthouse in leading the way for the industry. Their corporate strategy, their ESG goals, their water neutrality goals. So Ernesto, I'm going to turn it back to you to talk a little bit about Ecopetrol and your overall strategy.
Thank you. Okay. Again, this is our current situation in Ecopetrol. The last year we were a company in the oil and gas industry, but all the strategy changed 1 year ago when we launched our new version of the strategy named Energy That Transforms. It's maybe 20 years of a strategy. And this is our new business line. We have three businesses inside of Ecopetrol. The first is oil and gas, the traditional business. Today, it is the 82% of the value of the company based on, we are an integrated company in the oil and gas sector. We have exploration, upstream, development of the fields, midstream, pipelines, refinery, petrochemical, everything about trading, everything about the oil and gas business. 6 months ago, we launched our new company in Asia, in Singapore, named Ecopetrol Trading Asia, because we are exporting maybe 200 barrels per day, 200,000 barrels per day to Asia. This is our last growing in this strategy. But 1 year ago, we growing through the acquisition of M&A of ISA. ISA is the largest company in Colombia in the energy sector and transmission and highways. Today is the 70% of the value of the company. It's a very strong part of our new strategy because the transition needs transmission. It's impossible to think the energy transition without the transmission. And we create the third business line based on low emission solution. Because we believe in the near future, we need to replace the gasoline, the products based on the oil, in another source of energy. And we are talking about hydrogen, geothermics, everything, aeolic, another source of energy that replaces the hydrocarbons in the near future. This is our current situation, but if you think in the next 20 years, we say that the Ecopetrol, the oil and gas business, will be the 60% of the business. But ISA growing to the 26% and low emissions 40%. At the end, we are saying that we want to create a new Ecopetrol size, like the current situation, based on low emission energies. This is the major message that you can find in this slide. Where this is our really journey to the energy transition. This strategy has 4 pillars. The first pillar is about the competitive returns, because at the end of the day, we are a company. We need to profit, we need to be the best option for our shareholders. We want to grow with the energy transition. Look at the number. We believe that in 2040, we can create 30 or 40 millions of value year in terms of EBITDA. Generate value through the ESG. All in the worldwide, all people are talking about the ESG. And Ecopetrol talk about TESG, technological, environmental, social, and governance, because we believe that technology is in the heart of the sustainability. In Spanish, we say sostenibilidad, something like that. We have some challenge, like we want to be neutral in terms of CO2 or carbon emissions in the 2050, Scope 1 and Scope 2, almost the 50% of the Scope 3. We want to be water neutrality in 20 years. We want to create a new source of employment in Colombia, in our regions, not depend on the oil and gas industry. We want to grow in our country based on the value that we want to share with the people in Colombia. And the last one is cutting-edge technology. When we are talking about the cutting-edge technology, we have 2 major assets in Ecopetrol. The first is the people, our people. We want to create the right skills, the retooling processes for convert our current situation, our current skill to the new skill that we want to develop this kind of strategy. And we say that the 70% of our people needs to have the new skills based on the energy transition. For example, the geologists. Our geologist now works to find oil. Maybe in the near future, has to work to find white hydrogen, geothermal sources, everything about the energy transition. But this is a process, and we have 10 years maybe to create the new skills for the company. And the second point is about the technology. When you try to define all the challenge that we have this strategy and try to think in terms of the constraints of the technology, because the level of maturity of the technology today doesn't support this kind of strategy, we can find that we need to fix problem maybe in terms of value for 20 or 30 billion of dollars in the period of the time. 20, 30 billion is 2 years of value of the company, looking the growth with the energy transition. Maybe the 20% of the plan depend on the new technology or the level of maturity of technology to find the right solution for our problems. Example of that, hydrogen. Today we are producing 100,000 tons of hydrogen a year, 90% gray, 10% blue. In 20 years, we want to produce 1 million tons per year. 40% blue, 30% blue, 40% green, and 30% white. It's changed everything about our current situation in terms of the production of hydrogen. But the most important, this plant makes sense if we can produce hydrogen at $1 per kilogram. Today, to produce green hydrogen, we need to spend $8 per kilogram. We need to decrease the level 8 times, the level of cost of 10 times. This is the only way that we can have a really strong market for our new economy based on hydrogen to replace the gasoline, for example, in the cars. This is the kind of problem that my team is trying to solve day at day. And in this journey, we want to work, or we believe that the open innovation is the right way to find this kind of solution, because at the end of the day, it's a global problem. It's not just a Ecopetrol problem or Colombian problem. Decarbonization is a global problem for the whole industries. Energy transition, resilient, everything is the same situation for us. And when we try to clusterize, to organize the problem that we want to solve, we find that we have 6 major clusters in terms of the technology that we want to find. The first is about the resilient assets, because we need to increase the level of production of our industrial assets. We need to decrease the energy consumption, for example, the emissions, everything about of our current operation. Because I don't know what is the new pandemic and the new crisis of prices or the new war. The world is changing every minute and minute. We need to be more resilient in our industrial layout to support this kind of crisis. The second point is about decarbonization. Decarbonization has three parts. The first is decrease your emission. Try to don't emit. That is impossible. You can decrease, I don't know, 20, 30% of your current emission. And on the other side, we have the natural-based solution. Try to compensate the emissions. This is another 20, another 30% of the layout of the solution. In the middle, we have CCUS, captured carbon usage and storage. Maybe we need to try to understand and find new uses of the CO2 that you capture and create a new value using this CO2. The third point is about energy transition. Right? We talk about hydrogen, geothermics, every source of energy that replaces the uses of the oil. Another point is ESG, TSG in terms of the Ecopetrol. When we talk about, for example, governance, transparency is very important in a company like Ecopetrol in a country like Colombia. The transparency in the right pathway to make the better decisions. In terms of the social, what is the value that we can create for a country like Colombia, the population of Colombia. Another point is about the industrial revolution. Quantum, the impact of quantum, 5G, cyber, advanced materials based on maybe carbon, CO2, robotics. This is connected with the asset resilience. And the circular economy. The last point is circular economy. Circular economy for us is, for example, create value through the water management. We produce 10 times more water than oil. We produce 7 million of barrels per day of water. What is the real value that we can create in a new kind of economy based on water? For this reason, let me introduce to Guillermo, we want to create a new platform, try to understand what happened with the water in our industrial processes, with disposal, treatment, pullage, everything about the water. And maybe in the near future, we can sell water or create new kind of value through the water. The water is important for the hydrogen, maybe, the electrolysis. And for this reason, it's very important for us in the part of the big strategy of Ecopetrol, this kind of alliance and this kind of work, trying to create new ways to fix the problem in the future, or create our future through the open innovation and the open data. Let me introduce to Guillermo for the next step.
Sure, thank you, Ernesto. And I guess you're wondering why talking about water is important and why energy is important as well, right? For those who live in California, this will resonate pretty well. But the first thing that we like to start this conversation is water is not only about a technical discussion. And that's why the quote by JFK is important. It's not only about how you find the technology for desalination, for example. It's about a social conflict that is around water. And again, most of the geographies right now are suffering or suffered before. And what Ernesto said is very important. And how can technology leverage or support to solve this problem, right? And that's what you see in that slide, some of the big numbers that we have around the difficulty and the social problem on water. And just for you to know, for the other ones that didn't know, UN Sustainability Development Goal on how can you ensure access to fresh water, right? So having, let's say, that setup, and the first question I mentioned is, then what does the oil and gas industry has to do with water? And some of the big numbers in the US, the number for 1 barrel of oil produces 10 barrels of water. So it's basically a water industry. It's not an oil and gas industry. It's about how do you manage efficiently the water and how do you recycle it, for example, instead of start taking fresh water from the different sources and then just don't caring. So that's the call to action, right? And that's where the industries that require water make sense. In Colombia, this number gets up to 16 to 1, but in some of the fields, it can get up to 40. So if you can imagine 40 barrels of water for 1 of oil. And that's only in the production side. What you see here, it's 250 million. It doesn't say much, but it's a big number though, right? And then in refineries as well, that take water from rivers and from freshwater sources, it's also competing to, in this case in Colombia, for example, within cities that take the water from those same fresh sources, right? And that's why we were mentioning it's not only a technical problem, it's not only about optimizing for the operations, it's about solving a social problem that will increase in the coming years. Again, some of the big numbers that you also might remember, in refinery, the process takes 2 to 1. These numbers are from Ecopetrol's operation. And then why did we partner? And that's why it's not another Accenture project, another AWS project, another Ecopetrol project. And I think it was the belief of the different parties that this cannot be solved alone. And you need to enable the ecosystem to get to an answer. And it's not only about the 3 parties again, it's about how do you start enabling, for example, the government, the regulatory agencies. How do you provide transparency to the communities that are competing for that same fresh water? And other companies that might receive that water that you have in the quality that they needed for their own processes. And that's where the circular economy that Ernesto was mentioning makes sense, right? And again, this is not new. Some in the US, this can relate to California and Wyoming, where oil produced water, it's being used for example, agriculture, crops, or other uses. And this is how we started. We started a year ago, and what we said is, we're not going to solve the problem in a big, let's say, chunk. What we need is, let's see first the operations, and that's what we have done. We have 3 different assets, one for downstream, one for conventionals, and one for unconventionals, and that being the Permian, for those of you that know the industry. But what's important here, it's the second step, and it's open data platform. And what does that mean, right? It's about getting external sources, but also getting the access for others to start giving, let's say, to the platform more data so we can have better models, so we can have better accuracy, so we can take better decisions. And that's all about, again, it's not only about the 3 parties, it's about enabling the entire ecosystem. And as you know, water is a local problem. So you need to enable local ecosystems. It's not about the UN, it's about the specific actors in the field that interact with water. And finally, what I was just mentioning, and this makes sense in industrial complexes where you have companies or other industries using water, how can you start kind of building a marketplace in which what you need is a dynamic problem you have some water that is being discharged or used from one industry that can be used in another. And for that you need basically quantities, qualities of that water, and then the cost related to it, right? And that's what we're trying to do and solving. As I was saying, we have already the 3 different assets already live. But the key takeaway of this slide, I would say, is more the vision, where we want to head, and what are the different actors that we want to join the platform. And then you're wondering, okay, the vision is okay, but what does this does, right? And specifically what it does is three things, and I think it's simple. The first one around visibility. So as I was just mentioning, having the visibility on the quantity of water, the quality of water, it's even harder, and the cost in a company, it comes from multiple different sources. So how can you have in one place not only the operational visibility, which you might have, but also the financial and the environmental? And that's important in how do you enable decision making. So the first one is, and this might seem trivial, but for those tech guys, it's a difficult thing to do to gather all these data sources. And as I was mentioning, how can you get from the internal data systems to get external data that is relevant for the decision-making process? And the most important one that you might say it's optimizing, right, is how can you take better decisions with this? And we're going to show an example of the Permian on how are we enabling the operations to take better decisions to increase recycling of the water and therefore lowering the capturing of fresh water. That's what you want to achieve. That's the key metric on how can you give better water to the environment and how can you reduce the fresh water that you capture. To enable what we just said, right? It's about basically bringing the whole ecosystem into play. And then let me just show you how this looks like in a video, in a short video. And it's basically, if you want to focus on what we have, this is basically the look and feel of how the tool looks like. It enables for example, in this case, what you see here, that's kind of a more executive dashboard in which you have kind of the big numbers on what is the water that is demanded by the operations. Basically, for those of you that know unconventionals, it's basically about fracking campaigns. So you have big, how do you say that? Big needs of water, and then the supply that you have is very stable. So it's not an easy problem to solve because when you need water, you don't have enough water, right? And that's why you see that we're trying to solve for a problem, and it changed, but it's basically you need to have the entire year visibility on both the water supply and demand. And that's where the optimizing comes in, because a human can take a decision for next week and have a visibility for next week, but have the entire year and what you have to do in now that may impact in 4 months, in 7 months, that's not something that a human or an operator can now do, right? Just for you to know, and this is basically the water map, this is the visibility that I was mentioning on the different parameters. I know this looks like, okay, the visibility, I can have it, but this is something that was done in Excel with low accuracy. And having this first part done, hey, I have the full picture, it's a big deal again. It's about bringing together different data sources and how those data sources enable that decision making. As you're seeing here, it's basically what I was saying. It's you have normally two campaigns, two big campaigns where you need a lot of water, and basically some of the different insights that these have is, for example, you need to sell to third parties. Selling to third parties is the most expensive alternative that you have. What you want to have is storage in your own ponds. And that's what normally the operator is the first decision on how do you storage water. What we're doing here, it's the model, it's running the different optimization scenarios. And what it's saying is, hey, you should pick the most expensive alternative now at the beginning of the year so you can free capacity. And with that free capacity, you will be able to store it when you need it the most. So again, this is not an static problem. This is not a day-to-day problem. It's about simulating the different scenarios, and based on the different restrictions that you have, what are the best alternatives? And here is something that you might say, okay, why are you not replacing the operator with this tool? And it's basically because some of the decisions, and that's where human plus machine, it's been exponentially generating value. It's because the knowledge of the operation is still needed. Sometimes the recommendations that this is generating is just not possible. And it's because we're not programming for it. But it's because also it needs the human ingenuity behind in order to take better decisions on what this is recommending. So just few takeaways. The first one, this empowers the operators to take decisions that they cannot run in the long term. And this is a long-term simulation tool for this specific asset. For others, it's just about the day, and it's because it's just a closed-loop system. And then the other one is we have tons of lessons learned behind, and this has not been easy. Getting the data is a difficult piece, and when you get into these projects, you always have clients saying, "I don't have the data, I don't have the quality of the quality of the data is poor," but there is no perfect data either. So you always need to start somewhere. You need to make assumptions, and you need to be aware of those assumptions. And that's why, again, you need the operator kind of bringing this down to earth. And I would say the third one, it's you need the people that are using it fully on board from day one. And that has been, for us, we have 3 assets, as I mentioned. We have a refinery, we have a conventional field, and we have this one in Permian. And you can see the differences. It was like 3 different projects in which you have the human factor, the human designing and helping and achieving those results is the key on this. So I guess I would pass this.
Guillermo, can you talk a bit about sort of the value that's been achieved and the feedback that we've received from the field?
Sure, and that's a good question. In this case specifically, and it's because the US, you have a water market already. So Ernesto was saying, probably in Colombia we can sell water. No, in the US it's already happening. And you have third parties that manage that water, right? And that's, as I was saying, that's a financial direct cost. In Colombia, not yet, but what this tool is enabling is minimizing that cost, but having restrictions around how can you maximize recycling. That's what you want, and that's what water neutrality comes down to in companies that are intensive in water usage. How can you, again, the water that you have, how can you recycle it inside your operations the most? That's kind of the first value lever. And the second one is you want to do it the cheapest way, right? And the cheapest way is you have treatment chemicals that you might optimize depending on where that water is going. Energy consumption, Ernesto just mentioned, and it's basically in oil and gas operations, some of that water gets re-injected into the reservoir. So it's basically about if you have other usage, then that energy is not going to be consumed, for example, re-injecting. And in the refinery, and this is curious, the value of what they have achieved is visibility. And that visibility allows them to take small decisions that make a high impact. So I would say, and we have quantified around some $1 million, but I guess that's kind of the economic side of it in a water neutrality roadmap, right? And I guess that's kind of how can you take better operational decisions, having financial restrictions, but having an environmental check around what do you mean by water neutrality, right? And basically, you don't want, for example, to discharge into a river. And that's something that you need to take. If I can't discharge in a river, then what can I do with water? And that's what I mean by breaking the silos and taking decisions not only on the operational side, they were taking it, right? So what I would say, it depends on who you, on the different assets, but it's mainly around, let's say, cost, around having the visibility that you didn't have, and then around enabling, let's say, decisions that a human cannot take, right? I don't know if that answers kind of the question. So Steve, I'll give this to you, and we'll have a Q&A afterwards, so.
Yeah, do you want to just flip it back to the slide? So what we wanted to do is just, let me go back a slide here, just give you just a quick view of our high-level architecture. So as Guillermo mentioned, I mean, we're on a journey here. And what you see is what we would call our MVP architecture to get the solution live, right? So as Guillermo mentioned, we are live across 3 different types of assets: downstream in refining, in conventional and unconventional. And the biggest part around the value is around, as Guillermo said, the visualization component, right? And bringing the different data sources together in a way that, frankly, can't be done today or is incredibly complicated to do offline or not using technology. So, this architecture is really around getting us to that descriptive analytic, okay? Our next release is really beginning to introduce predictive. So you'll see SageMaker start to show up in the next version, and that's just not about predicting around the different optimization scenarios, but also taking in kind of net new data sources. So weather, precipitation, evaporation, a number of things that we will begin to introduce into the model and basically transition from descriptive with the inclusion of predictive in our analytics. So we're super excited about where the platform is going. Again, Ecopetrol has been an incredible partner in this journey and something that Accenture and AWS are collectively taking to market across our other customers. The solution itself sits on Accenture's tenant, so it is offered as a SaaS solution. We've just kind of customized, as you can appreciate, the user interface specific to the client. But just overall, we're on a journey to water neutrality. I think you heard in Adam's keynote the other day, AWS is committing to be water positive by 2030. Is that right? Right. So it's been an incredible, I would say, partnership with AWS, with Accenture, and with Ecopetrol, and frankly others in the industry that we've gotten feedback on as we've been building out this platform. So I guess any questions around the use case, the value, sort of where we're going, the availability of the platform, or anything that we could answer for you?